Hey everyone, it's Peter from Daydream Nation, and I've got Davey Cretin back to the channel. How are you, Davey?
Excellent. Thank you for having me, good sir.
Absolutely. Good to have you back. Record labels that stiff their artists. Bands or albums that should have done much better if it wasn't for the record company. Davey, you're going to provide your experiences being behind the counter at the record store and me as a consumer. So without further ado, what is your first pick as an artist that should have done much better if not for the record label?
Okay, thank you. My first artist it's a band, actually. I have two bands and one solo artist here. First one is a band. I'm actually doing a series on Tom Curless's channel, Curlessmania, about this band. We did not get to this record yet, so I haven't spoken about it yet. It is the Cars, their 1987 album, Door to Door. This came out on Elektra, August 25th, 1987. Now, their first album, self-titled, 6 times platinum. Second album, Candy-O, 4 times platinum. Panorama, platinum, because that was their slightly experimental album. Shake It Up, the fourth record, 2 times platinum. Heartbeat City, 4 times platinum, their big commercial breakthrough, if you want to call it that. Greatest Hits that came out right after that, 6 million copies sold. These are all RIAA certified here in the States. And then Door to Door that came out in 87, only certified gold about 2 months after it was released. Probably that's off of Heartbeat City and the Greatest Hits. But to me, Elektra dropped the ball here. They released some wrong singles, and the record did not fare as well as it should have, because I think it's a great record. And Todd Evans, our friend, I've heard him say on YouTube that Go Away is the best song on the record. I think it's the second best. Has a great Ben Orr vocal, and that should have been a single. And why Go Away wasn't a single, I have no idea. But it's got a great melody. It's rock, but it's not hard rock. There's no heavy guitar on it. And it should have been, they should service, the way labels should work is they should service the more commercial songs to top 40 radio and adult contemporary, and then service the heavier, harder, more guitar-oriented tracks to rock radio. And sometimes labels don't do that. They'll put out a single. They'll say, oh, okay, that did okay. We'll just throw out another song. And they don't think about it. They don't throw enough money behind it. The Cars were a huge band. And a year after this record came out, they disbanded. They did a 42-day tour, 2 television appearances. And when they next surfaced decades later for their final album without the late, great Ben Orr in the band, they only did, I think, 11 or 12 tour dates and 1 television appearance on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. Rick Ocasek was a studio rat, and he just didn't like to tour. But since he wrote 98% of the songs, he's the one that made the bulk of the money. The other guys needed money to survive by touring, and Rick just wasn't a touring guy. He'd rather just make records, produce other bands. Also, 3.5 years between full albums. Heartbeat City came out 84. This came out 87. So back in the 80s, a 3.5 year layoff. This was even longer. Well, it was right before Def Leppard with their 4 or 5 year wait between albums. This is their lowest charting record of their 7 studio albums. It only peaked at number 26 in the US. And by you, Peter, in Australia, it peaked at the same thing, number 26 on the Australian charts. Like I said, the wrong singles. Go Away should have been a single. Everything You Say is another Ben Orr vocal, catchy, upbeat, just the mellifluous song. That should have been the third single. And then there are 2 mellow Rick Ocasek tracks that they could have edited because they're 4 or 5 minutes long. Wound Up on You and Fine Line. They should have serviced those to adult contemporary top 40, and they didn't. They only put out You Are the Girl, which hit number 17 in the States, number 69 in Australia. Strap Me In, my personal favorite from the record, which hit number 85 in the US, but it hit number 4 on the rock chart. And You Are the Girl hit number 2 on the US rock chart. And then Coming Up You, which is a good Ben Orr vocal, but that stalled at 74 and number 37 on the adult contemporary charts. I would not have released Strap Me In as the second single. I think that was a big mistake. And I think Elektra dropped the ball. Maybe they saw the writing on the wall. Rick was on Geffen. He was having solo hits. He was producing. There was friction in the band, probably because the other guys wanted more of a say, but Rick sort of ruled the band with a bit of an iron fist back in the day. So the Cars are my first choice, and I think this record should have done better. If you don't know this record, you should check it out. There are some great songs on it. Up through this record, personally, I don't think the Cars ever made a bad record with bad songs on it. The follow-up, a few decades later, without Ben Orr on vocals and bass, that record's a little, I'll talk about that another time. But Elektra, you dropped the ball. You released the wrong singles. You should have promoted this more. Or did Rick say something to you guys? Did you guys know that the Cars weren't going to be a band for much longer? So you didn't throw a lot of money behind this record. That's another possibility. Maybe they knew something the rest of the guys in the band didn't know. Maybe it was a band decision. Who knows? But that's my first choice. The Cars on Elektra Records.
I reckon Elektra gave up. I really think it was very low wattage promotion, at least in these parts. Didn't see much on the local music TV stations. I think they were probably concentrating on Motley Crue Girls, Girls, Girls and their hair metal acts. I think they probably thought Cars were a bit passé.
Right.
I really
think that's a possibility too.
They really dropped the ball on this. It's a very underrated album. It's something a little bit different, the sound, comparative to the other Cars albums. I think it was a sound that was very contemporary. Front and center, the record company dropped the ball. I don't know if Rick was into it. I've had some testimonies. Melissa Nee's been on my channel. She saw the tour and she thought it was terrible. And she said, this band, they're breaking up. Rick was very disinterested, very low wattage. Apparently the concerts were very poorly attended. I think Rolling Stones really gave this quite a savage review. Viewers, correct me if I'm wrong. But
I don't remember.
There was a bit of negativity around this, but Elektra dropped the ball.
The good thing about this record is, for the most part, David Robinson went back to playing real drums. It was more organic. They were in the studio together. They used two old songs from 1977, Leave or Stay and Ta Ta Wayo Wayo, that they had played live but never had recorded because they were having so much fun in the studio. They jammed them out, threw them on the record. And it was a more organic sound than Heartbeat City, which was produced by Robert Mutt Lang there, and it was overprocessed, overproduced, took too long to get that record out, and I have problems with Heartbeat City.
I do
this
too.
Record I like.
Yeah, I think Heartbeat City is half a great album. I think the highs are really highs and the lows are meh. But, you were saying about the timing. My recollection is the greatest hits, at least in these parts, came out in 86, and that charted really well. And this came out in 87. So there's a real big drop-off. You would have thought that the momentum with the greatest hits, what they could have done in the record stores is they could have done a dual promotion. Here's the greatest hits, and here's our latest. And done a dual, so one cross-references the other. What's your recollection of the promotion? Very low wattage in the
There wasn't much. They only made a couple of videos for the record, for Strap Me In and You Are the Girl. And I don't remember, by 1987, I had MTV. I don't remember seeing those videos all that often.
I think metal was taking over, mate. I think this.
It was hair metal at the time and pop music.
Yep, I think this sort of music was sort of, they regarded as a little bit twee and passé. So, yeah, I think they put all their resources to Girls, Girls, Girls by Motley Crue. That's my theory.
That's where they saw the money.
Absolutely. All right. My first pick is a band called Blue Murder on the Geffen label in 1989. So this was the John Sykes band. So we all know the story. In 87, John Sykes did all the guitar work. He was the songwriter with David Coverdale. He got fired. They put together a project where it was him, Carmine Appice, Tony Franklin on bass, the Fretless Monster, a trio, and put together quite a smashing hard rock album. We talk about it now, but it really stole diddly squat in the day. It barely charted, and I think it's one of those albums that the reputation exceeds what it actually did sell. So Blue Murder, I think the biggest mistake with this album is they put a song out called Valley of the Kings, which is like an epic song, goes for 8 minutes.
Yep.
And it had this really expensive MTV clip where, you know, the band's playing, they're all wearing puffy shirts, Seinfeld reference, you know, the Egypt background, the pyrotechnics, you know, a little bit of Def Leppard. It had a real Mutt Lange type production. When people went to the record store to actually buy the CD, they couldn't find it. It didn't chart.
There was no commercial single available for it. They said, if you read about what the band members say, well, what Carmine says and the Fretless Monsters say, that people would go into the record stores looking for this song. They didn't know who it was, and there's no single available. And it's just an odd choice for a single for a new band. They should have had something a little more accessible.
It's such a diverse album, Davey. There's a little bit of funk, like Billy. There's a little bit of Thin Lizzy. There's also Whitesnake. It's a very diverse album, but they just chose the wrong song for the first album off the single. This album cover's terrible. Like, when you're a teenager, you get attracted to bold album covers that invite you. What does this tell you? Does this tell you that this is a heavy metal or a hard rock album? It looks really drab. Blue Murder. What's Blue Murder? Blue Murder is like a Cockney expression. I don't think that translates to the US crowd. What sort of band is this? Also, timing. This came in at 1989. John Sykes is a red hot talent. Okay, he got sacked out of Whitesnake. They should have got this album out in 1988 when 1987 was red hot. Could you imagine? Right. You know, when 87 is selling like hotcakes, Geffen should have, rustled this band into the studio, put it all together, got it out in 88 and said, oh, this is the real guitarist for Whitesnake. All these mistakes, it didn't do well.
And this album I've always loved. I used to play it all the time in the record store back in 89. I played this in the Badlands album on Atlantic Records all the time. That's another record that should have done a heck of a lot better. But both of those records, I love them. I've always loved them. And I go back to the Blue Murder record a lot. And I spoke about it just like you spoke about Sykes earlier today. The puffy shirt, the pirate look.
Give me a cutlass. It's sort of, if you look at it, you go, okay, are they new wave? Are they, is it Duran Duran? I don't know.
But the songs on the album are great. Jelly Roll should have been a big hit. The title track, Blue Murder, great song.
Jelly Roll should have been the first single. So that sort of funk, the rhythm, is not too far out of the wheelhouse of what Extreme were doing about 3 or 4 years later. Like Hole in My Heart, that sort of acoustic and that lot of syncopated rhythm and the
with that drum.
Yeah. Were they ahead of their time? I don't know. But there's a lot of
screwed over. Yeah. And that logo is so hard to read, the way the gold logo with the blue, it's a little too dark. It almost looks like one of those death metal bands. What does that say exactly? It's tough to read.
Yeah. I love Valley of the Kings, Davey. I love that song. That's another song that I get obsessed for, but I just don't think it was commercial. I know what they were trying to do. They thought, okay, with 87, Still of the Night that was kind of an epic song, but that had that Zeppelin type. That was like a teaser track. I think they pushed the envelope too far to make that as the first single. Blue Murder is my first choice.
My second choice was the first one I thought of for this show. It's an artist that I've loved for decades. I've never spoken about him on YouTube. This came out in 1991. It was his first solo record for Virgin Records. He had been with A&M for over a decade. He released a studio record in 89, a greatest hits in 1990, which reached the top 10 in England, his home country. I'm talking about Joe Jackson. I used to battle with a friend of mine, coworker. He was a huge Elvis Costello fan. I like Joe Jackson. We would just argue back and forth and berate each other and tease each other. But Laughter and Lust, 51 minutes, 22 seconds. Also like The Cars, it was recorded in Manhattan, both recorded at Electric Lady Studios in New York City, co-produced by Joe Jackson. It's got 13 songs on it. I would say 10 of them, 9 or 10 of them, could be possible singles. In your neck of the woods, Laughter and Lust hit 57. Here in the States, 116. So it didn't do well at all. On the US AOR chart for Radio and Records, a trade publication, it hit number 19, and they released different singles in different territories. And the first single, Stranger Than Friction, hit number 119 in Australia, didn't chart here at all. The first American single hit number 28 on the rock chart. It's called The Obvious Song. And number 2 on the alt rock chart, and only 64 in Canada. They have a song on here called Hit Single. It was released in Australia, hit number 129. And it's an ironic song because that's the way Joe Jackson writes, very ironic, biting, sharp lyrics. And it's about the actual hit single. It's a great song. You have to hear it. Amazing lyrics. And then they released Oh Well, which is a cover of a Fleetwood Mac song, going way back to the Peter Green days. He wrote the song, and it only hit number 25 on the US mainstream rock chart. But the thing is, he had a brass section on here. He has sax, trombone, trumpet, and cello players. But one reason I think this record failed, besides Virgin not pushing it enough, he was 5 or 6 years too early for the swing and ska revival that happened in 95, 96, 97, where you had the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, Squirrel Nut Zippers, Cherry Poppin' Daddies, and in 1996, the great film by Vince Vaughn and Jon Favreau, Favs himself, Swingers. So in the mid-90s, there was a huge swing revival time, and some of the songs on this album would have fit in that because they have the brass section. But he was too early. Another thing about Joe Jackson, he's not that I'm a great-looking guy, but he is not the best-looking rock and roller, Joe Jackson. He has that an unusual look. His voice is sort of an acquired taste, maybe. He's got that British nasally whine, and he's got a big attitude. I've heard from people who've met him that he won't sign autographs. He doesn't want to talk to his fans. Maybe he's changed now and he's mellowed in his old age. And then just the fact that I think they released the wrong singles. They released stuff from the first half of the album. They ignored the second half of the album, which has some great low-key ballads. I mean, they're upbeat, but they're in the ballad form. The Other Me is a great song. My House, the old songs, just has a swingy sound to it. There's some great songs that weren't released as singles. And I just feel like Virgin took him, he left at A&M, his contract ran out. Virgin signed him, but I don't think they put a lot of money behind him. And they probably paid a lot of money to get him. He wasn't a hugely hot commodity, but he was a critical fave, a critical darling. His records always did well with the critics, except one guy for NME wrote that this record had no soul and no cojones, and it made Phil Collins look like Public Enemy, which I can't see at all. I think Joe Jackson has way more cojones than Phil Collins. I love Phil Collins. I love Genesis. Just Phil Collins' solo stuff is a little bland and by the numbers. To me, anyway. That's the way I think of a lot of it. I prefer his stuff with Genesis a heck of a lot more. But to say that Joe Jackson is soulless and wimpier than Phil Collins, I disagree with that NME writer. It got decent reviews, the record, and Joe Jackson is on record saying it was the most commercial record he'd made in a long time. He said he was upset it didn't do well in the States at all, but it did well overseas, so at least he was happy about that. But I really think Virgin dropped the ball. They should have released different songs, pushed it more, and give it more of a promotional heft than A&M was doing on some of his later albums after Night and Day. So this is Virgin Records dropping the ball on Joe Jackson, my number 2 choice.
Well, that's very surprising because Virgin are very savvy. They're one of the more savvy labels, and they usually know how to market their artists, and they definitely drop the ball. I am very familiar with Joe Jackson. I'm a fan, but he is a record label's worst nightmare because he never does the same album. He tries stylistically all these different things. He'll do a bit of post-punk. He'll do ska. He'll do world music. He'll do orchestral. Night and Day. He'll do New York jazz. Night and Day had a bit of New York jazz. What was the album that I'm thinking of? Body and Soul. Body and Soul.
Love that record.
I love it. A&M should never have let him go. They really knew how to market him from project to project. But this album has got a very sort of twee little album cover where he's all done in makeup, that Charlie Chaplin silent makeup.
Yep.
And stylistically, it looks awful. And, yeah, I think they picked the wrong single and they didn't market it. And the album's probably got too many songs. They needed a strong-arm producer just to say, look, let's cut it down. Yeah.
That's the CD era, 1991. Everyone was making longer records.
Yeah, they really dropped the ball. I do remember seeing a little bit of marketing for this because Joe Jackson did have a very healthy market in Australia. There were a lot of songs that hit top 10 over here that didn't chart in the Northern Hemisphere. For example, Real Men was a top 5 song.
Nice.
And which is groundbreaking. So, no, I love Joe Jackson, and I think that's a really good pick. But you need a label that knows their artists and needs to work with them per individual project because he's a shapeshifter, and you've got to just pin him down and say, okay, Joe, what are we doing on this project? Let's work with you. Don't second guess.
But he might be a bit cantankerous and might be a problem for a label just with his personality and the way he was back then.
Well, that's on him.
Mellowed now.
That's on him. Just looking at his discography, After Laughter and Lust, I think he really became more obscure, and you really didn't hear
a cult
much
artist.
Of him. Yeah, Symphony No. 1, Night and Day 2, Volume 4, Rain. He become more genre, more boutique, a boutique artist.
Some of those records are great, though.
They're great, but for fans only. Anyway.
And there's one thing I didn't mention is that right before this record came out, because he recorded it in October and November of 1990. The only time I saw Joe Jackson was, I think, September or early October 1990. He did what they billed the Workshop Joe Jackson tour. And I saw him in this small club on Long Island called Malibu. And it was a great show. And he was probably doing some embryonic version of these songs. I'd have to look up the set list because I don't remember the whole show off the top of my head.
He was one of the angry young men of post-punk, wasn't he? With Elvis Costello.
Yep, Graham Parker.
Yeah, right up there.
And the great bass playing on this record and almost every Joe Jackson album, Graham Maybe, phenomenal bass player, one of my favorites. Love that guy.
No, he always has top-notch musicians.
Yep.
All right. My next pick is a band that you could say was a bit of a contemporary of Van Halen. And it always goes into this category of should have been bigger, if not for the label, and were they marketed properly. The label was A&M. When A&M got swallowed up by Universal, they moved into Geffen and went in a more heavy metal, hair metal direction. I'm talking about Y&T. Now, Y&T, this is Mean Streak. Now, you look at that album cover, you think, oh, that's decidedly heavy metal. I've got a live album, quite metally. Now, the thing about this band is you had a hero guitarist come lead singer in Dave Meniketti, but, probably lacked that sort of lead vocalist, that somebody that had that X factor. They were musos. They sounded great on album, but they never broke through in regards to a commercial single. They didn't have a breakthrough hit. They didn't have a breakthrough album. You had Black Tiger in 82, Mean Streak in 83 that hit the US 103. In Rock We Trust hit the top 50, number 45, Down for the Count went to number 91, and so forth and so forth. The lower reaches of the Billboard top 100, top 200. Two reasons. Maybe the X Factor, the lead singer. So Dave is a great lead guitarist, but maybe he didn't have that charisma. But at the same time, I think you had a record label that didn't quite know how to market them. So, A&M Records were very well renowned for new wave. Their biggest selling artists in that era would have been the Police. But heavy metal, not so good. So they're putting out a very strong image. It's like an Iron Maiden. It's a Judas Priest. It's a heavy metal. Now, I think Y&T would have preferred to be something like a Van Halen. So if they based themselves and did their marketing very similar to Van Halen in regards to their album covers, in regards to their film clips, and were less genre specific like metal, I think they would have broken through and sold more albums. So, Van Halen, they appealed to the metalheads, Davey. They appealed to the hard rock crowd, but they also appealed to the masses. Yes. Y&T, because of all the marketing with A&M, they're just appealing to the heavy metal crowd, and then not appealing to the public. They went into hair metal. They did that whole Bon Jovi Summertime Girls on the Geffen label. I think that, they jumped the shark by then. It was all over. I think in 83, 84, when Van Halen were doing 1984 and songs like Jump, that was the time that they could have jumped on their coattails and done something very similar, because I always think Y&T and Van Halen are in a similar wheelhouse or in the periphery of each other. But Y&T were just not quite marketed or finessed by A&M as they should have been. Warners were very savvy. They knew what to do. They knew to focus on David Lee Roth and the personalities of the band. Maybe they just needed to do something that gave it a little bit of a boost, a little bit of adrenaline. What do you think?
I think that I don't remember if it was Joe Jackson or Squeeze back in the late 70s, early 80s. They complained about A&M Records and said, this label is spending all their money on Styx and they're not promoting us enough. And I'm a big Styx fan. Styx were huge in America, while Squeeze was always a cult act here. And Joe Jackson just really had the two hits. In America, Is She Really Going Out with him? And then a few years later, Stepping Out from the Night and Day record. So Y&T, they were a hard rock band that flirted with metal. They were beloved they're a cult band. They actually were a big cult band. They had those great Bright album covers, and they should have been marketed better by A&M. And I don't remember hearing any Y&T on the radio here in New York back in the day. I first became aware of them after Saturday Night Live in the early 80s. There was a show, I can't remember the name of it, on late Saturday night, Sunday morning, that would show live bands. And they showed Y&T performing Midnight in Tokyo. And I said, wow, is that a great song?
Yes.
It's epic. It has different sections. It's mellow. It rocks.
Yes.
The guitar work is phenomenal. The drummer is just so hard hitting. And that's the first time I ever heard of Y&T, was seeing them on NBC commercial TV here in the States. They just never got that huge push from A&M that they should have gotten. I have something here. Let me grab it. It's a couple of feet away. Our friend from Canada, Tim Derling, has written a book on Y&T that I have handy.
And
Down for the Count.
I'm in that book.
Nice. And I haven't read this yet. This is in my reading pile.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, we do talk about the issues there, but I think this is an example of a record label that, they're savvy when it comes to new wave, pop music, but when it comes to hard rock, probably a little bit clueless. But I think
what do?
The imagery is too hard. They're playing to the genre audience, and the genre audience in that era was very, it didn't really break through into the masses of the late 80s when it became, explosive, that any hard rock band that put an album out and virtually go top 5. I think what they should have done is, if they were savvy, they should have kind of looked at the Van Halen model and tried to do a balance between the genre audience and a little bit more to the populace.
Another thing might be the image, the fact that they started in the mid-'70s as Yesterday and Today and put out some indie records, 2 records, and then they weren't as good looking as some of the guys in Van Halen. So, and the way the record label may have looked at them, well, these guys have been around for a while. They should sell records. They have a fan base. They have an audience, and A&M dropped the ball.
Yeah. Anyway, I think they could have sold better, if not for the label. So there you go. All right. What's your final pick?
My final pick was sort of going to stay in the same genre, the same realm slightly. And I am going to talk about an album, a CD, that the record company really interfered with. I've spoken about this band before, but not this particular record. And I did mention this in one of our previous shows, another record by the band, Dream Theater, Falling into Infinity from 1997. Storm Thurgeson did the artwork here. And it's the 5-man progressive metal band from New York, where I am. It's their 4th studio record. It was on East West through the Warner umbrella, but it was really managed by Elektra Records. Came out September 97, recorded in Manhattan, just like my other 2 records, at Avatar Studios. This album, like a lot of progressive metal albums at the time, 78 minutes long, which is a lot of songs. Produced by Kevin. That's almost a double album, basically. It is 2 40-minute vinyls. It's 78 minutes, 80 minutes. So it was produced by Kevin Shirley, and the record label wanted the band to go in a more commercial direction. So they were writing songs, and the record company wouldn't give them money and give them permission to go into a studio and record the songs. So they had so many songs, by the time the label said, okay, you're going to go into the studio, here's your producer, it's Kevin Shirley. And they already had enough songs for a double record. We said, oh, we have enough songs for a double record. And the label said, no, it's going to be a single album. You're not releasing a double record because that's just too much. Now, Mike Portnoy, the drummer, he was the one battling with the record company. And John Petrucci, the guitar player, was sort of trying to go along with what the record label said. And Kevin Shirley, the producer, said, hey, John, we'll fly you down to Florida and you'll go join Desmond Child. He'll help you write a song. So they're using a song doctor for a progressive metal band. What the heck? So Kevin Shirley was sort of fighting with the band, and Portnoy didn't like it at all. He didn't agree to this. Petrucci goes down to Florida. He had a song called You or Me. And if you hear the original version, it's a really good song. But the version that Petrucci ended up co-writing with Desmond Child, it's just too commercial. They changed the title to You Not Me. Now, this record, it charted 53 in Canada, charted 52 in America. They only put out 1 video and 1 single for commercial radio called Hollow Years, which is a really good ballad, but they didn't give it enough of a push. They put out 2 singles to rock radio, promo CD singles. Burning My Soul hit number 33 on the US rock chart. And then that You Not Me song I was mentioning hit number 40 on the US rock chart. Now, their second album, Images and Words, had gone gold in America, sold 604,000 copies. The follow-up in 94, Awake, sold about half that, less than half that, 271,000 copies. And Falling into Infinity only did half of that, 97, 141,000 copies. So there was a steep decline in their record sales, but they were never meant to be a huge band because they're progressive metal. But the label said you had a hit, you had that great song from Images and Words, was a big top single, everyone loved it, and they never really had another commercial radio hit after that. And their greatest hits album is, oddly enough, funnily enough, called Greatest Hit plus 21 Other Great Songs, because they really only had 1 hit, Pull Me Under. So I think Elektra pressured the band into this more commercial direction, which is not who they were. Now, this is like telling the New York Knicks, a basketball player here in the States, Jalen Brunson, not to hit 3-pointers from outside the line, which he's great at. You're basically cutting off his legs and cutting off his nose to spite his face by saying, hey, you're a prog metal band, go in a commercial direction. That's not what this band is about. They're about the riffs. They're about long songs. And there's only 2 songs that exceed the 10-minute mark on this album. In fact, Kevin Shirley, the producer, took a 10-minute song and he took the instrumental middle section out and made it a separate instrumental, which Mike Portnoy was not thrilled about. Portnoy's lyrics on this record, he writes the lyrics to 3 songs. 2 are about the record business and the record label, and 1 is about the A&R man, Derek Oliver, and it's called Burning My Soul, and it has some really biting, incisive lyrics. So the label wanted accessible songs. They did give them accessible songs. There's a song called Anna Lee, a little under 6 minutes. It's a ballad. It's a very Elton John sounding song. Petrucci's guitar work has that shimmery, shining, watery Davy Johnstone from Elton John's band. He has that, like in Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, those shimmering chords. Petrucci's playing that in the song. It could have been edited down to a single. There's another song called, not Hollow Years was a single, Take Away My Pain, which is about his father passing away. And that's a 6-minute song. They could have edited that down into a commercial radio single. To me, they dropped the ball on this record. They pressured them. They delivered a commercial sounding record, and a lot of Dream Theater fans hate this album. They'll rank it almost at the bottom of the 16 CD catalog here. For the next album, Portnoy and Petrucci demanded the record label leave them alone. And in 1999, they came out with Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory. And it didn't really up their sales, but that's one of their best albums. And most of the fans would rate that number 1, 2, or 3, possibly. So it was record label interference, East-West, Elektra, under the WIA umbrella of all things. They tried to make a round peg fit in a square hole, and it just didn't work right.
What's the highest selling album in that catalog, Davey?
It's definitely Images and Words, their only gold selling record from 92, their second studio record.
So that would have sold just short of 1 mil?
No, a little over 500,000 in the States. It's 600,000.
Right. Do you think that's clicking up to platinum by now?
It may have. It's from over 30 years ago. But the record label's not going to certify it. There was a different label now. They don't want to pay to get it certified. And if it does get certified platinum, they'll have to pay them probably more in royalties. So
yeah. Look, I really think it's a strange era for music. Look, the accountants and the bean counters have always been in the record companies, but they were becoming more prevalent in the mid-'80s onwards. And they were controlling a lot of artistic directions. And a lot of business decisions were based what's in the charts. So if there's a Guns N' Roses, if there's a certain band that are, selling units, we need another one. We need another one, and zero copy, and flood the market with so many. This is where you had a lot of song doctors that were starting to come and infiltrate the industry, and they would, come and collaborate with all these established artists, like Aerosmith, for example.
That's the one I was going to say.
And bring them in, So John Kaladna. Yeah, absolutely. Part of that Geffen machinery, getting these songwriters like your Desmond Childs to basically, write something commercial and make it a hit. And the artistic integrity of a lot of these bands, was being eroded because it was all about commerce. It was all about the money. And, I think kudos to Dream Theater for their subsequent albums that they said, stuff it. We don't want record interference. That's the sort of music that will last. People will go to that music, and that's the ones that are going to influence. My next pick is a band that was signed to Geffen Records in 1989. And a lot of people associate this band with the Guns N' Roses. There were so many Guns N' Roses clones bands that were signed to Geffen, Warner's, Elektra, etc., etc. This one, I think, really should have done a lot better, if not for the record company not backing them. And I'm talking a band called Little Caesar. Now, Little Caesar had a lead singer called Ron Young. one of the best soul rock voices you could ever hear. Fantastic. Now, they had the backing of John Kaladner. They also had Bob Rock produce the album. They had all the forces with them. The album, they had a single called Ship of Fools that charted in the lower reaches of the charts. Because it didn't set the world on fire, it didn't get that initial sale. Basically, Geffen dropped them within a year. With Geffen Records, in the old days, they would back you after a couple of albums. They would, if the first one failed, if the second one failed, they'd give you a period of time. Now, look at the 70s with Lou Reed. He was on Sire Records. How many albums stiffed, but they didn't drop him off the label. So in the late 80s, it was basically this album, it didn't do well, and they released the second one, but it was all over.
Remember that record? Yeah, Chain of Fools, and isn't it an Aretha Franklin cover?
Yes, correct. And that charted in the lower reaches.
But also, they had more of a biker image. They looked like burly bikers, sort of like Circus of Power.
Yeah.
They weren't sort of pretty boys like some of the guys in Guns N' Roses, like Axl and Duff, maybe.
Yeah. The album has a bit of a Rolling Stone Aerosmith vibe, maybe a little bit of Humble Pie. It should have appealed to that sort of classic rock crowd. I mean, maybe it was at the wrong time because it wasn't terribly out of the ballpark of something like the Black Crowes. And we know how big they became. But the point I'm making for the purpose of this show is that by the late 80s, record companies had zero tolerance. If you didn't hit the mark straight away, you're gone. The bean counters were ruling.
Like with Badlands, the first record had a big push, and the second record, they sort of like put it out there, barely any push. And that's what happened with a lot of the hair metal bands, the glam metal, whatever you want to call that specific genre. You can call it a lot of things. But the record labels were signing it, putting the stuff out. If it didn't sell, bye-bye. We'll just move on to the next band. Someone's going to stick. We're just going to throw it against the wall until we have a hit with somebody's record.
Yeah, with Badlands, that's an interesting one because it's a great album. It sounds a little bit different, and that's why it's sort of, it's a bit more of a timeless sound. There are a lot of hair metal albums of that day don't sound timeless, but it had more of a classic rock feel, don't you think?
Definitely. Blues rock. It harkened back to the 70s.
And I think there was a lot of internal problems with that band between Ray Gillen and Jake E. Lee. And I've heard some conflicting stories that, because of the excesses of Ray Gillen, some of the tours got blown off.
The interview you just did, the gentleman spoke about it from DAD.
Well, on Facebook, Jake E. Lee said that's all baloney. It never happened. The bass player, Greg, guys, I'm quite willing to do an interview, set the record straight. But, I've heard stories that Ray Gillen, because he was partying too hard, the tour got blown. So if you're trying to support an album and get it out there, you
need to play live.
Absolutely. So look at this. The album cover looks naff. To me, you go into a record store. What does this say about Little Caesar? It's like a caricature.
It looks like a cartoon from back in the day.
The band looks very biker orientated. You don't have a real semblance. So I think it was marketed not in the right way, but it's not a bad album. That, to be fair, it took a couple of albums, or because they have recorded way into the 90s and beyond to get their sound, and it's a kind of a really loose Rolling Stones sort of feel. It was like one shot and you're gone.
That's how it was back in the day.
Absolutely. Well, there you have it, folks. I really enjoyed this series about record labels that have stiffed their artists. So, folks, please put your selections. I'm sure there are more that we haven't covered. Davey, do you want to promote any shows that you're currently doing?
Yeah, on Cretin Classics, my channel, I just put up the first episode in a new series, and you named the series. Behind the Counter, Tales from the Record Store. So thanks for naming the series, and I gave you credit in the video for naming it during one of our many conversations.
Yeah.
And I'll have more of those. And that's my latest video, along with a couple of tributes. I'm going to film a concert review after this of The Fix. I saw them a few weeks ago. So check out Cretin Classics.
Yeah, thank you. And the check came in the mail. Thanks for that. That's great. Well, folks, yeah, please like and subscribe to Daydream Nation. Check out Davey's channel. Lots of great content. But one thing's for sure, me and Davey will concoct some other show during the course of 2025. Be there or be square. We'll see you soon. And cheers. All the best. See ya.
Bye-bye.